The summer sun was dipping behind the tree line when the new Mustang rolled into the quiet suburban neighborhood. Its glossy black finish gleamed under the fading light, a statement of pride and power. The rumble of its engine echoed down the cul-de-sac, turning heads as neighbors peeked through blinds and curtains. For most, it was nothing more than a fleeting spectacle, but for one particular household, it became a target. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the homeowners association, watched from her porch with narrowed eyes. Her son, a teenager who had long since cultivated an attitude far larger than his responsibilities, stared wide-eyed at the car. It wasn't admiration alone, it was desire. His fixation grew instant, and with it, the sense of entitlement Karen had always nurtured in him. The neighborhood itself was one of appearances. Lawns trimmed to precise measurements, paint colors pre-approved, trash cans hidden from street view. Karen thrived here, patrolling the rules like a personal kingdom. And while most homeowners quietly endured her scrutiny, this Mustang's arrival stirred a storm inside her. To her, it represented disruption, an object too loud, too flashy, and too far outside the realm of control she sought to maintain. The owner of the Mustang, however, was no ordinary neighbor. He had moved into the community only months before, quietly and without ceremony. His demeanor was calm, his presence unassuming, but his past and profession carried a weight few could imagine. Though he kept his identity guarded, he was a man of authority, one whose career demanded respect. Yet in this neighborhood, he sought peace, not recognition. Karen's son wasted no time boasting to his friends about how he would soon be behind the wheel of the Mustang. He strutted around the street, telling anyone who would listen that the car would be his, as if claiming it by proximity alone. Whispers spread, and curiosity about the new neighbor grew. For days, Karen lingered near the driveway, making thinly veiled comments about how such cars don't belong here, and suggesting that responsible people don't flaunt wealth in modest neighborhoods. Each remark carried the same undertone: resentment. Yet beneath it all lay a plan forming in her mind, a belief that her son was owed what others had. The stage was set, though none realized how quickly the situation would escalate. The Mustang was more than just a car. It became the spark that would ignite a chain of entitlement, confrontation, and ultimately, revelation. By the end of the week, the son's demands grew louder, and Karen's patience thinner. What began as envy twisted into audacity, and soon, entitlement would cross the line into action. The quiet cul-de-sac was about to become the center of a drama no one could have predicted. The first confrontation came on a humid afternoon, when cicadas droned in the background and sprinklers ticked across manicured lawns. The Mustang sat polished in the driveway, sunlight dancing across its curves. The neighbor, unaware of the storm brewing, tended to his yard in silence. Karen's son approached with swagger, announcing that he wanted the car. It wasn't phrased as a request, but a demand, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no. The owner simply dismissed it, returning to his task, offering neither explanation nor argument. To him, the absurdity required no response, but to Karen's son, silence was an insult. He stormed back to his mother, his ego bruised. Karen listened with outrage, fueling his indignation with her own. In her mind, this was a matter of principle. How dare a new neighbor disregard her family? How dare he deny her son something he wanted? From that moment, Karen escalated. She sent emails to the HOA board, framing the Mustang as a violation of community standards. She claimed it was an eyesore, a disruption to the neighborhood's character. When those claims met resistance, she shifted her tactics. The issue was no longer about aesthetics. It was about power. She began patrolling the street with her phone, snapping pictures of the car, muttering about safety hazards and reckless displays. She positioned herself as the victim of another's defiance, spinning tales of disrespect and imagined rules. Each step she took was designed not to resolve, but to pressure. The Mustang's owner remained unshaken. His calm demeanor infuriated her more than defiance ever could. To Karen, this was an affront to her authority. She needed compliance, and when it didn't come, she prepared for war. Her son added fuel to the fire. He circled the Mustang daily, brushing his hand against the paint, peering inside as though it already belonged to him. He bragged louder, insisting the car would be his, that his mother would handle it. Neighbors began whispering, uneasy with the spectacle, yet unwilling to challenge Karen directly. The tension grew until it was no longer avoidable. Karen's pride demanded action. Her son's entitlement demanded satisfaction. Together, they plotted their next move, one that would bring the law into the equation, though neither of them knew how disastrously it would backfire. By the third week, the air in the neighborhood felt heavier, charged with a tension no one wanted to acknowledge. The Mustang gleamed in the driveway, untouched, unmoved, yet it had become the silent center of an escalating feud. Karen's resentment had matured into a resolve. She told herself it was about rules, about order, about the preservation of neighborhood standards. But beneath those rationalizations lay the truth. Her son wanted the car, and she believed he deserved it. It was on a Saturday morning, as birds chirped in the trees and neighbors mowed their lawns, that Karen made her move. Her son, pacing in agitation, had worked himself into a fury. He claimed the Mustang's owner was mocking them by ignoring his demands. Karen, always ready to validate her son's frustrations, decided the matter could no longer be handled through emails or idle threats. It was time, she told herself, to escalate. With exaggerated urgency, she dialed the local police line. Her voice trembled with fabricated outrage as she painted a picture of harassment and intimidation. She accused her neighbor of creating a hostile environment, of flaunting a vehicle in violation of HOA regulations, of causing her son distress by refusing to communicate. Each word was a blend of entitlement and fiction, spun carefully to provoke an official response. Within the hour, a patrol car pulled into the cul-de-sac. Curtains shifted, blinds tilted, and the quiet neighborhood watched. Karen stood on her lawn, her son beside her, both postured as victims awaiting justice. The officer stepped out, calm but cautious, and approached. Karen launched into her rehearsed tirade, gesturing toward the Mustang, her voice carrying down the street. She demanded action, insisted that laws were being broken, that her son's rights were being violated. The Mustang's owner emerged from his home, his expression unreadable. He listened silently as Karen hurled accusations, as her son puffed his chest with misplaced confidence. The officer turned toward him, ready to mediate, but then recognition flickered across his face. The tension shifted in an instant. For the first time, Karen noticed hesitation in the officer's tone. He addressed the Mustang's owner not with suspicion, but with deference. Karen frowned, confused by the sudden change. Her son scowled, demanding answers, insisting on punishment. But the officer seemed careful, respectful, even cautious. The truth, of course, was one Karen had never considered. The man she had accused, the neighbor she had targeted with such reckless confidence, was no ordinary resident. He was the police chief, the highest authority in the department. The officer on scene knew it, and that knowledge changed everything. Karen, oblivious, continued her rant. She believed she had cornered her neighbor, that the law was finally on her side. Her son smirked, already imagining the keys to the Mustang in his hand. But the balance of power had shifted, and the silent authority standing before them was no longer just a neighbor. It was the very figure who commanded the badge. The officer attempted diplomacy, gently suggesting that this was a misunderstanding, that no laws were broken. Karen bristled at the dismissal, growing louder, accusing both men of bias. Her son shouted over him, demanding the car. The scene descended into chaos, a spectacle of entitlement unraveling under the gaze of watching neighbors. Through it all, the Mustang's owner remained calm, his silence more powerful than any argument. He knew the moment would come when his identity would be revealed, when Karen's misplaced confidence would collapse under the weight of truth. And that moment was drawing near. The neighborhood, once passive, now buzzed with curiosity. Whispers rippled through the cul-de-sac. Something was happening that would alter the balance of power in ways no one expected. Karen thought she was winning. Her son thought the Mustang was within reach. But both were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The officer shifted uncomfortably as Karen's tirade grew louder, her words spilling into the street like a performance staged for the entire neighborhood. She pointed at the Mustang, waved her arms wildly, and accused the owner of everything from intimidation to community endangerment. Her son stood at her side, fists clenched, his teenage arrogance feeding off her theatrics. He demanded the car again, louder this time, shouting that it was owed to him. Neighbors emerged quietly from their homes, some pretending to check mailboxes or water lawns, others simply leaning against doorframes, eager to witness the drama unfold. Karen, in her self-righteous haze, mistook the gathering as validation. She believed she was rallying the neighborhood to her cause, unaware that most stood in hushed disbelief at the audacity of her demands. The Mustang's owner remained steady, his calm presence only deepening Karen's frustration. She took his silence as smug defiance, as though he was mocking her by refusing to engage. She pressed harder, her voice sharp, demanding the officer issue citations, remove the car, and reprimand the neighbor. She declared that she would take this matter as high as necessary to ensure justice. The irony hung heavy in the air. The officer glanced at the Mustang's owner, his hesitation now impossible to ignore. Finally, with deliberate care, he addressed him, not as a suspect, but as a superior. The words were quiet, but they carried unmistakable weight. He referred to him as Chief. The street fell silent. Karen blinked, confusion clouding her fury. She turned toward the officer, demanding to know why he used such a title. Her son frowned, his arrogance faltering for the first time. The officer's posture was deferential, his tone respectful, his demeanor transformed. The truth spread through the gathered neighbors in a ripple of whispers. The man Karen had targeted, the man she had accused and harassed, was the police chief himself. Karen's bravado wavered. She sputtered, insisting it didn't matter, that her complaints were valid regardless of titles. But her voice had lost its commanding edge. Her son shifted uneasily, the certainty in his stance crumbling as reality sank in. The officer, clearly unwilling to indulge Karen further, redirected his focus entirely. His words to the chief were short and professional, a subtle acknowledgement that this situation had spiraled into absurdity. The neighbors watched with wide eyes. For months they had endured Karen's dominance, her endless policing of their lives under the guise of HOA authority. But now, before their eyes, she had run headfirst into a wall she could not climb. Her attempts to wield power had backfired spectacularly. The very law she had called upon had revealed her target as its leader. The chief, still calm, finally spoke, not in anger, but with quiet authority. His words were not for the neighbors, not for the officer, but for Karen and her son. They were measured, precise, and undeniable. He reminded them of respect, of boundaries, of the consequences of false reports. His tone carried no theatrics, yet it landed with a force greater than any outburst could muster. Karen's face flushed crimson, a mix of embarrassment and stubborn pride. Her son muttered under his breath, still unwilling to admit defeat, but his defiance had lost its teeth. The officer excused himself, clearly relieved to be dismissed from the spectacle. The cul-de-sac remained silent, the neighbors frozen in the aftermath of the revelation. Karen had called for justice, but justice had turned its gaze upon her instead. The Mustang sat gleaming in the driveway, untouched and unyielding. A symbol not just of pride, but of a line she could never cross again. But entitlement rarely dies quietly. And though Karen had been humbled in public, the bitterness within her brewed deeper still. She would not forget this humiliation, and her son would not forgive the denial of his desire. They would retreat, but only to scheme. The drama was far from over. Humiliation lingered in Karen's chest like a bitter poison. The revelation that her neighbor was the police chief had not only dismantled her sense of control, but had also exposed her as a fool in front of the entire cul-de-sac. For a woman who thrived on authority and appearances, it was an unbearable wound. The whispers of her neighbors, though quiet, stung her ears every time she stepped outside. To them, she was no longer the enforcer of order. She was the woman who had called the cops on the chief of police. Her son, equally stung by embarrassment, grew restless. His arrogance had not dissolved, only hardened into resentment. He brooded, over the car, still convinced it should be his, still insisting that they had been wronged. His mother's pride and his entitlement fed off one another, creating a storm of bitterness that sought an outlet. Karen convinced herself that she had only lost a battle, not the war. The Mustang, she decided, was still a threat to the neighborhood's standards, and she would find another way to rid herself of it. If the law could not be used against her neighbor, then the HOA would become her weapon. She began drafting complaint after complaint, flooding the board with letters alleging violations. She claimed the Mustang's paint job was too reflective, that its engine noise exceeded acceptable decibel levels, that its presence lowered property values. She argued that its mere placement in the driveway, rather than a garage, was an infraction. None of her complaints had merit, but her persistence created pressure. Behind the scenes, she lobbied other board members, whispering about disorder, about the dangers of allowing exceptions. She warned that if the Mustang remained, soon, other unsuitable vehicles would follow. Her strategy was clear. Wear down resistance with repetition, turn irritation into compliance. Meanwhile, her son's retaliation took a different form. He lingered near the car, not with admiration, but with menace. Neighbors noticed him loitering after dark, circling the Mustang like a predator. On more than one occasion, the sound of scratching gravel echoed suspiciously close to the driveway. Subtle threats began to emerge. Mud smeared on the tires, footprints across the hood, fingerprints on the glass. The chief noticed, though he did not react immediately. His silence was not weakness, but calculation. He understood entitlement better than most, and he knew that Karen and her son would not stop until they overreached again. His patience was deliberate, his composure unshakable. He let them believe they had room to maneuver, all while documenting every step. The neighborhood watched the drama unfold, torn between fascination and unease. Some sympathized with the chief, quietly offering support. Others, wary of Karen's wrath, remained silent. Yet all could see that her crusade was spiraling out of control, her obsession consuming the very peace she claimed to protect. Late one night, as cicadas hummed and porch lights flickered, Karen and her son made their boldest move yet. They crept toward the Mustang under cover of darkness, armed with tools and righteous fury. Their whispers carried the determination of people who believed they were owed victory. But what they failed to realize was that every step had been anticipated. For months, the chief had endured their harassment in silence. Now, the moment was approaching when silence would end, and authority would speak with finality. The trap was nearly set. The night was heavy with stillness, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves and the chirping of crickets. Karen and her son crept toward the Mustang, their figures silhouetted against the dim glow of porch lights. Their determination masked their desperation, but their movements betrayed nervousness. The son clutched a screwdriver in his hand, eyes glinting with malice. Karen carried her phone, ready to film what she believed would be evidence of neighborhood violations. What neither of them knew was that they were being watched. The chief had anticipated this moment for weeks. Quietly, he had installed cameras around his property, every angle covered, every shadow accounted for. He had coordinated with trusted officers, ensuring that if Karen and her son acted on their threats, the response would be immediate. He had given them rope, and they had taken it willingly. As the son reached for the car's handle, intent on forcing it open, a sharp light burst across the driveway. Motion sensors flickered to life, bathing them in stark illumination. The sound of footsteps followed, firm and deliberate. From the shadows, uniformed officers emerged, their presence undeniable, their authority unquestionable. Karen froze, her face pale in the harsh light. Her son dropped the screwdriver, his bravado vanishing in an instant. The chief stepped forward at last, no longer the silent neighbor, but the commanding figure he truly was. His expression remained calm, yet his presence carried the weight of finality. The officers spoke, their words clipped and professional, informing Karen and her son of the charges they now faced: trespassing, vandalism, harassment, filing a false police report. Each accusation was backed not by hearsay, but by undeniable evidence, footage, documentation, and witness accounts. The very law Karen had attempted to weaponize against her neighbor now bore down upon her with crushing force. The neighborhood watched in silence as Karen sputtered excuses, insisting it was a misunderstanding, that she was only protecting community standards. Her son pleaded, his arrogance shattered, tears welling as reality settled on him. But excuses carried no weight under the harsh truth of recorded evidence. The chief did not shout, did not gloat. He simply allowed justice to speak for itself. As the patrol car pulled away, carrying Karen and her son into the night, the cul-de-sac remained eerily quiet. The neighbors, once wary of Karen's wrath, now felt the shift in power. The queen of the HOA had been dethroned. Her reign ended not by rebellion, but by her own reckless pride. In the days that followed, the HOA board distanced themselves from her, stripping her of authority, erasing her influence. The neighborhood breathed easier, lawns trimmed without fear of inspection, decorations placed without threats of fines. The Mustang remained in the driveway, gleaming proudly, not just a car but a symbol of resilience against entitlement. For the chief, life returned to its quiet rhythm. He had never sought conflict, only peace. But when tested, he had met arrogance with patience and entitlement with truth. His neighbors, once cautious, now greeted him with gratitude and respect. They understood, perhaps better than ever, the power of composure and the consequences of pushing it too far. As for Karen and her son, their legacy lingered only as a cautionary tale. Their names became whispers of warning, reminders of how entitlement unchecked can consume and destroy. The Mustang they coveted never belonged to them. What they truly lost, however, was far greater. Their standing, their credibility, and the illusion of power they once held. The cul-de-sac was quiet again. But beneath that quiet lay a story no one would forget. Of a car, a feud, and the lesson that not even the loudest entitlement can stand against the steady hand of true authority.